Hey now everybody, this is Professor Island and we're discussing critical perspective, critical approaches, and today we are discussing new historical criticism. If you'll recall, historical criticism essentially is a critical perspective that examines a work based on the era in which it was written or the era that it refers to in the work itself. This is an objective analysis that requires you to find historical information and relate it back to the references within the work. New historical criticism is a critical perspective that essentially says that it is difficult or perhaps nigh impossible for someone who lives in the current era, for example, to translate something appropriately that was written 20, 30, 50, 150, 200 years ago. New historical criticism says that a work is going to be translated from the era that the audience lives in rather than the work in which it was created. That requires, however, that you are going to find secondary sources, and it always comes down to the secondary sources. You're going to have to find secondary sources that examine and explain the values, mores, laws, etc. of the era in which you currently live. This is especially important when you are going to be doing an historical analysis within your work as well. Understand that a new historical criticism is not going to be a comparison between now and then. It is going to look at the work only in the context of the current era. Something written in the mid-1800s, for example, was written at a time when the laws and the social construct was very specific in terms of race, in terms of gender, and in terms of class. In most cases, especially in the United States, these issues are no longer the same. And what you would have to do from a new historical criticism is when you look at a work, for example, like Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, and its use of particular terminology or the explanation of class, you would realize that if someone were to read this today and not understand that this work is a reference to the 1800s, that they would misunderstand the point of the story. Mostly what you're going to be doing is translating the work from this particular context. Where this really becomes helpful is you find a work that was written, say, by Bob Dylan in the 1960s. And it talks about what seems to be a never-ending war that a large number of people are against. Well, historically, Dylan wrote this in response to the Vietnam War. However, someone who's reading it today might think it's based on one of the current wars that is in existence now and could actually use the material, the information about today, about the current wars, about the current conflicts, and bring that back to the song, which is written vaguely enough, to basically translate it as if it were written today. And new historical criticism basically does that. It looks at a work as if it is referring to today, and it translates it from those particular contexts. That means some things will seem sexist, some things will seem racist, some things will seem culturally or otherwise insensitive, and that would be part of the analysis. Just remember that you still have to find secondary sources that discuss the values and rules and mores today. Certainly the People's Chronology in the Learning Resource, Literature Resource Center would be helpful along those lines. New historical criticism is yet another one of these critical perspectives that you can use to analyze a work in a different way. Stay in touch.